Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, today we're talking about dividing the land and how it connects to time, times, and half a time. Okay, so my first slide here, I'm going to talk about peace and security. And so we know about this from 1 Thessalonians 5. Now, as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. Okay, so let's talk about those verses. Okay, so I had a question here. Who's the real thief in the night? So I think sometimes, it's hard to know the prophetic shadows of things. Because especially, we know that Rebecca has twins in her womb, and so basically we have people on the right and militant on the right and militant on the left. They're like twins. And so sometimes when you're reading about like various people in the scripture, it'd be hard to know if it applies to Trump or applies to Biden, because they're twins. They're very similar. Okay. And their followers are really similar. But I kind of am leaning on right now that I think the thief in the night is Trump. Okay. And so I brought in some other verses that talk about the thief to give us a little bit more information that might help us figure that out. Okay, so in Hosea 7, we read, "When I would heal Israel, the iniquity of Ephraim is uncovered, and the evil deeds of Samaria, for they deal falsely. The thief enters in, bandits raid outside. With their wickedness they make the king glad, and the princes with their lies." Okay, so one of the things we learn about the thief in this verse is that the thief is someone who enters in, okay? And then I guess there's a connection to bandits that are raiding outside, okay? So, and there's a connection too to Samaria, which is a connection to the northern kingdom, okay? In these verses, okay? And then, so we'll keep reading. In Joel 2:9, it says, "They rush on the city, they run on the wall, they climb into the houses, they enter through the windows like a thief," okay? So I've talked before about how I believe Jesus is the door and Trump is the window, okay? And so in Joel 2, I think this is talking about the army of the Lord. And I think sometimes people read these verses and think the army of the Lord is like a righteous army, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I believe these could be Trump followers, okay? And then in Matthew 24, it says, "But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into." Okay, so what I believe is right now that Biden is the head of the house, because, he is. He's the rightful president of the United States, okay? And if he knew at what time the thief, Trump, and his followers were coming, he would have been on the alert. So it's kind of interesting because they've been doing the January 6th hearings to try to understand what happened on January 6th and how to prevent it from happening again. But the problem that we have is that things are moving kind of slow, and there's a lot of investigation. And what's kind of interesting is that of the Trump followers, I would say probably only a small percentage of people were there on January 6th, but I think he has a lot of followers. And they would be what I call like the Christian nationalists. They're the ones that are wanting, they think this country, you know, sh- um, should be a Christian country, and they're um, like, they don't quite understand the concept of separation of church and state, and so they're trying to build kind of like a messianic type kingdom in America with Trump as their leader. Um, I've talked about this in some of my previous videos, um, and uh, and so I mean, so for January 6th, some of the people on January 6th got arrested, and so some of them are in jail, but there's still so much more out there, and their mindset hasn't changed at all. Trump's still saying the same thing all the time, and they're still believing the same lies all the time. Okay, so and so what's interesting now is that, especially with the January 6th hearings, um, they're kind of closing in on Trump, and so um, these people are getting even more desperate and more zealous about their cause, and so they're pretty dangerous. um okay, and so then in John 10 we read about, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. Okay, so the one who enters by the door into the fold of the sheep, that's Jesus the Messiah. Okay, um and really, God is the one that um sends him through the door, who like really appointed Jesus as the Messiah. Okay, but what you have is Trump. And so actually, while I'm saying this, is kind of interesting too to think about. He's not only like trying to steal um from Biden his position and authority, but he's also stealing from Messiah, like the glory and um, worship that's due the Messiah. The you know, so so that is Trump climbing up some other way. Okay, but this is where I said sometimes these prophetical shadows are hard to figure out, because I mean, you could almost say the same thing about Biden climbing up some other way. Okay, so that's why I said it's not always clear. I mean, except for, like I said, this verse in Matthew 24, where we have the head of the house um, is not knowing when the thief is coming. That kind of makes it more clear. Um, okay, so the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night, while they are saying peace and safety. Okay, so through the years, we've always identified a lot of people talking about peace and safety. But what I'm thinking with President Biden on I'm sorry, July 14th this year, we had a big peace and safety thing from Biden. Okay, so Lapid, who's the interim Prime Minister of Israel, and Biden were signing a security agreement on 7/14. I thought that was interesting because it's 777. So you know how I talked about with Trump, he's got 6 peace agreements. And so I think that connects to the 666. Okay. So it's interesting that we see Biden signing a security agreement on 7/14, which is 777, and I believe he's the 7th king. So definitely really interesting. And for a while there, I was I was only kind of focusing on this agreement that Biden signed with Lapid for being kind of the peace and safety, or the peace and security, you know, comment. But then on the 16th, on Saturday the 16th, Biden met with the leaders of 9 Arab countries, and they were at the Jedediah Summit for Security and Development. So we see it a second place there. Okay. And so I thought that was what was interesting. I see kind of a connection with Judas and the money box. Because remember how Jesus said, okay, so Judas had the money box. I think that's a connection to Biden because right now he has the money box of America. And what is he doing? Spending the money on a lot of um, uh, sinful things. Like I heard that I just read that today, I didn't get all the details, but he signed a bill today, I guess, to provide money for people that want to cross state lines to get abortion. Okay. So using our tax dollars for their sinful um, agenda. Okay. So he's like Judas with the money box. And what did Jesus tell Judas? He said, what you do, do quickly. Okay. Because Judas was going to betray Jesus. Okay. And so what I saw with Biden is that what Trump took a whole year to do, Biden did in one trip to Israel. So Trump had his deal of the century in January 2020, and then he had 6 peace deals throughout, or 5 more, quote unquote, I should say, peace agreements, the Abrahamic Accords, over the course of the next year. Okay. And so it was kind of interesting when we saw Biden go into Israel. It's like he was trying to do, all that Trump did, just in this one short little trip. And so we signed this agreement with Lapid. He was meeting with the Palestinians, talking about 2 states. And well, just trying to be friends with the Palestinians or whatever they talked about. And then meeting with the leaders of the Arab countries, and then he was meeting with Saudi Arabia, trying to get them to join the Abrahamic Accords. So if you're wondering if the Abrahamic Accords are that Trump did are a good deal, then you might want to question that if you're seeing that Biden's stepping in and like continuing to try to recruit people into the Abrahamic Accords. So that should be a flag, a yellow flag, red flag for you. Okay. So then what did God say? While they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly. Okay. What did we see exactly 1 week later? Biden came down with COVID. Okay. And then, just right after he signed this agreement, there was heat waves in America. There's been fires in the West in America. There's been flooding in America. Just a lot of and monkeypox. So just a lot of bad things going on. And then so God says they're like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. Okay. So what I'm thinking is that with Trump's quote unquote deal of the century, his judgment came 7 weeks later. Okay. And and then continued for a while. Okay. What I think is that Biden's judgment is going to be half that time, 3.5 weeks. Okay. First of all, with Biden, we don't have to wait 7 weeks for the judgment to start. And so fast. So what did God say? Sudden destruction. Judgment is fast. Okay. So we continue on in these verses. Verse 4, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you are also doing. So in verse 6 it says, do not let us not sleep as others do. Okay. So I was thinking that we got Trump's peeps are, they're thinking the thing um, was, um, so I can't say this expression or YouTube will block my video, but they're believing that lie, okay? Um, and, but we also have the Democrats. They think they're righteous for fighting for abortion rights, okay? So they're sleeping, okay? They don't know the truth, okay? Um, and then, so it says, for those who sleep, they're sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night, okay? So, um, so I put that Trump's peeps are sleeping at night because I believe the delusional influences on them. And what we got is Biden as, Judas, spending the money in the bunny box, but also Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, who's drinking the wine out of the vessels of the temple, um, I think is also a picture of Biden, just using up the resources of the temple for your own unjust um, um, agenda. Um, and so we're neither, okay, so if we follow Messiah, we're neither followers of Trump or followers of Biden. We're of the day, okay? And so what we need to do is put on the helmet of the hope of salvation, okay? And so we don't need to participate in trying to, we don't have to be a Christian nationalist because we have faith that God has a plan for us, okay? And that we trust that God's going to bring salvation and the Messiah, so we just are going to wait for that, okay? And then it says God has not destined us for wrath, okay? Um, so we're going to get salvation through Jesus, okay? Um, okay, so that's peace and security. Okay, so what I think is interesting is in the book of Esther, we have 100-day banquet, 180-day banquet, and a 7-day banquet. Okay, so what I think is the 180-day banquet connects to 666 because you can parse out 180 to be 666. I think that connects to the days of Trump, and I think he is the beast from the earth. I think the 7-day banquet connects to Biden. He's the seventh king, 777. The days of Biden, I think he's connected to the beast from the sea. Okay. Um, so we have this concept of two banquets. Okay. Um, and it kind of connects to other things that there's two of in the scripture, like there's two visits to Joseph. Um, and what's interesting in the January 6 hearings, they were focusing on the kind of the unknown 187 minutes. So I thought that was very interesting because if you take 180 and add it to 7, you get 187. So very interesting. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, and then what I thought was interesting too is we read about in Esther 1 about Vashti. Vashti does not come on the 7th day. Okay, so the 7th day could be the time of the 7th king. Okay, and so what we saw in Biden's trip to Israel is that Lapid was asking for military help with Iran, but Biden wants to keep trying for diplomacy, even though it's been shown that diplomacy with Iran doesn't work. Okay. And so you could say that if Vashti is like a picture of America or a picture of Biden, America's not willing to help Israel militarily. Okay. And so what happens with Vashti? Vashti gets replaced, okay, by Esther, okay? And then, so if we're in the 7th day, it could mean that we are at the end of, if we're seeing this fulfillment about the 7th day, it could mean we are at the end of Biden's time, the end of the 7-day banquet, okay? And, and we are fulfilling the book of Esther, so we'll keep looking at the book of Esther. So the first banquet of Esther, I think, could connect to Trump and his quote unquote peace deals, because we had so there was Esther and the king and Haman, and so that could connect to like for the DOC, could connect to Trump and Netanyahu and the Palestinians, okay? But then with the other peace deals, it'd be like Trump and Netanyahu and the other, some other Arab nation, okay? Um, because I felt like one of the problems with these Abrahamic Accords is that they were trying to make deals with people that weren't, that really want to divide the state of Israel. Okay, they're kind of their motivation. If you read about some of their motivations, is because they wanted to have some leverage to push the two-state solution. Okay, so it's not like they're doing it because they really care about Israel and are friends with Israel. Okay, it's not true peace. Okay, then if you continue in the book of Esther, we read about Haman building his gallows. Okay, and then okay, so what it says in Esther 5, it says, then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches. Doesn't that sound like Trump? Okay, yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Okay, that could be a picture of Biden, okay, because Trump is not happy because Biden is president, okay? Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Okay. So, I thought it was interesting that this gallows is 50 cubits high, because that could connect to the dividing of time, times, and the dividing of time, that number 5. Okay. And then, so that's interesting, but it's interesting too to see this picture of, Haman's wife and his friends, like giving him advice of how to deal with Mordecai. Okay. So if you watch the January 6th hearings, you would see that there was these people that surrounded Trump that were giving him advice as to how to get rid of you know who. So definitely very interesting. And then it says, the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Okay. So definitely very interesting. Okay, and then what's really interesting in chapter 6 of Esther, so I highlighted Esther 6:6. I thought that was interesting. So it says, okay, so Haman came in and was going to talk to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows. Okay. And sometimes the king can be a picture of God, so what's kind of interesting is, so, Haman came in, and the king said to him, what is to be done for the man who the king desires to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? Okay, doesn't that sound like Trump? Okay, so I think it's a picture of how Trump couldn't believe that God would want anyone else as president except himself. Okay. So that was kind of interesting. So in that chapter, we have Haman ends up, kind of like having to run away in shame. Okay. Because Mordecai was the one that was honored and not him. Okay. So definitely, I think that was definitely, we saw the fulfillment of that with Trump and Biden. Okay. Okay, so then in Esther 7, so then it moves on to the second banquet of Esther. Okay. And so it says, now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day also, as they drank their wine at the banquet, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done. Okay, so I thought this was very interesting because, so if you have the king being Lapid, And then you have Biden being Haman at this point. Oh no, wait, not actually. Okay, so I don't know who Haman is right now, but like the king would be Lapid, and then Esther the queen would be Biden. Okay. Um, I mean Haman could be like a picture of the the Arab nations. Okay. And the king, so the king said to Esther on the second day, also as they drank their wine at the banquet. So remember that Biden's constantly drinking wine because he's spending all of America's money. Okay. And then so we have Lapid saying to Biden, "What is your petition? It shall be granted. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be done." So what's very interesting is that Lapid signed this agreement. Now it's interesting because in the agreement, it says that like Biden was interested in the two-state solution. Um, just specifically named Biden, okay? But because Lapid signed this agreement, he's responsible, okay? And so I kind of think this connects to the story of eating the fruit in the garden. And you know how the man blames the woman and said, well, it's the woman's fault. She, gave me this fruit to eat, and so I could see Lapid saying that, like, okay, it's not my fault, it's Biden's fault, he gave me the fruit to eat, you know. So definitely very interesting. Okay, but what's very interesting too is the second day. Okay, so it actually was the second day of Biden's trip to Israel that he signed this agreement with Lapid. Um, and then it's interesting that it's the second banquet of Esther, so that you can consider that, Trump's quote unquote peace deals are the first banquet, and then Biden's are the second banquet. But what also is interesting about this concept of second is this was the second event on July 14th that, okay, so 7 years ago on July 14th was when Obama was that was the signing of the Iran deal. Okay, July 14th, that exact day. Okay, so very fascinating. So 7 years apart. Okay. So so the second banquet, it's a picture of the second document dividing Israel that we are under judgment for. Okay. And then, like I said, the half of the kingdom, the peace sign agreement with Biden that involves dividing Israel into the two-state solution. Okay. So then Esther goes on, Esther 7:3. Then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my petition and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king." Okay, so so remember, we see in part. So kind of making a guess of what these verses could connect to. So these could be the pro-abortionist, because at the same time that Biden was in Israel, signing this document, the same time frame was, soon after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we had the pro-abortionist. We're trying to get Biden and our Congress to make abortion a law that cannot be overturned. Okay. And so, they would have been like saying, we have been sold by the right-leaning Supreme Court. If Biden's people were only sold as slaves to Pharaoh, like the slavery of socialism, the slavery of, whatever you want to call this weird abortion religion thing, their slavery to whatever, like worshiping Molech or that sort of thing. So that could be a possible fulfillment of those couple verses. And then it says, but then I think in verse 5, then it says, then King A asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he and who would presume to do thus? And then, so in verse 6, so I highlighted that because I thought that was interesting. Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. So this is what makes Israel, what makes prophecy, like we see in part, because, even like the character of Haman can switch around. One time it could be Biden, and one time it could be Trump, and one time it could be the Arab nations, so that's why we kind of see in part until we, see the whole story. Okay. Yeah, and so actually, I'm trying to talk at the same time that I'm looking at my notes because it was actually a couple days. Okay, so Biden left for Israel on the 13th of July, and it was actually on July 10th he was in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He was telling the abortion protesters, who on the 9th they were protesting outside. On July 9th, they were protesting outside the White House. They called it their summer of rage. Okay. And on the 10th was when Biden told them to keep protesting. And he talked about maybe creating a national law, or somebody creating a national law. And he was considering, declaring a public health emergency with this abortion thing, which apparently, he did today by, sort of, by deciding that he's going to use tax dollars to help people get their abortions. So definitely connected to, this second banquet of Esther. Okay. And then around the same time, because, actually on July 12th was the 7th January 6th hearing. Okay. And so what we had is, in verse 6, basically we're seeing that Haman, is being exposed. Okay. And so that's what we're seeing in the January 6th hearing is Liz Cheney is exposing Trump in the January 6th hearings. Okay. And then what we have is Haman becoming terrified before the king and queen. And so with Haman terrified, like a picture of that is, we see that Trump is kind of getting afraid about these January 6th hearings, especially because, it was reported that he tried to call a witness for the January 6th hearing. So you're seeing that fear being exhibited by his behavior. Okay. So definitely very interesting. And then in Esther 7, it says, okay, then Esther 7:7, it says, okay, the king arose in his anger from drinking wine into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Okay, so I kind of went back and forth about the prophetical pictures of these verses, but I'm seeing as I read this that I should have been aware that it was Esther 7:7. And so the king arose in his anger from drinking wine. I told you Biden's the wine drinker. And then he went into the palace garden. Okay. And so, that could be a picture of Biden going to Israel. Okay. The palace garden could be a picture of Israel. Okay. And so I wrote Biden on his trip to Israel right when America's economy is in shambles, because that's really true. It was kind of ironic because, here America's kind of falling apart and our economy's in shambles. And partly they said part of the reason why he went on this trip is to try to get some more oil, to help our gas prices. Okay. But it's just, very interesting to me that, here America's a mess and he thinks he's going to go help out Israel. So I thought that was interesting. Okay. So then while Biden was in Israel, Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Okay, so then what we saw is Trump around that time dealing with 3 different trials against him. Okay, so they're closing in on him. Okay. Now, when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" Okay, so since it's verse 8, we could say that the king returning from the palace garden could be a picture of Trump returning as 8th king, or it could be a picture of the Messiah's return. Okay, and so the king's returning into the place where they are drinking wine. So that could be a picture of Trump, kind of like, break, like going against Biden and his people. Okay. And then it says Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. So that could be a picture of Biden as quote unquote raping America, making a mess of our economy, etc. Okay. Because Haman falling on the couch, could be a picture of, like rape. And there's other places in the scripture where we read about, because Dinah gets raped. Okay. And then the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" So that could be, Jesus could be saying that because, will Biden even try to assault the queen with Messiah in the house? That could very well be. And then it says, as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, "Behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Okay. So as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Okay, so that could be a picture of how now there's judgment on Biden the baker. Okay, and we'll talk about the baker later. And then it says Harbonah, one of the eunuchs. So the eunuchs, that could be a picture of Trump's peeps. Okay, who were before the king, said, "Behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king." So here I think the gallows is a picture of, okay, so Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king, could be a picture of the Jewish people. Okay. And then we have, it says, okay, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, with 50, kind of being a picture of the dividing of time. And so what we have is Haman gets hung on the very gallows that he made. Okay. And, so I was trying to figure this out, that if Biden's going to get hung on the same gallows that he made for the Jewish people, what would that be? And so he signed a document that talked about dividing the land of Israel. So what the gallows that he's going to get hung on is America being divided. Okay. So the gallows for Mordecai is the prophetic shadow of dividing the land, at least right here. Since Biden is committed to dividing Israel, God will cause America to be divided. So we'll see a repeat of J6, okay? Which I really think. There was some. Oh, and because also too, this reminds me of. Um, okay, so I'm gonna look up a verse in Revelation. Um, so in Revelation 12, we're reading about the beast and how he, first he's making war with. Okay, so first the dragon was thrown down to the earth, and he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male. Okay. I mean, so that could be a picture of Biden persecuting, I mean, first of all, like persecuting the Trump followers. Okay. And then it says the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, and she flew into the wilderness. And then it says the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So those two verses could be talking about the January 6th hearings, that there's all this information being poured out of the mouth of people, okay? But the earth is drinking up the river, okay? So, you know, so, if, Trump is the beast from the earth, Trump could be the one drinking up this river. Okay, this river of information coming from the January 6 hearings. Okay, and and we've seen that with Trump, where he's, like saying this isn't true and this is fake news and they're persecuting me. And then in verse 17 it says, so Revelation 12:17, it says, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Okay, so we saw that the king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. And so I think there's a connection here where the dragon goes, he's enraged with the woman, so I guess that, is that because, okay, so because Biden and his followers are mad about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, or, just in general, Biden's mad at Trump, and so then he, or like he's mad at the attention that Trump's getting, and so that's why he wanted to go to Israel to kind of get, like, steal some of that attention. Okay, because I'm seeing when I say went out to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, that connects to Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. Okay, so I see a connection there. Okay, so we'll move on here. Okay, and so what's interesting is in Ezekiel 23, it says, for when they had slaughtered their children for their idols, they entered my sanctuary on the same day to profane it, and lo, thus they did within my house. Okay, so there's actually, so this was actually the verse that applied to July 14th, 2015. So I found this verse at that time. And it's now applying to July 14th, 2022, because on this exact same day, July 14th, we saw Obama with the Iran deal the exact same day that the Planned Parenthood videos were being released, where it showed that they were selling baby parts. And then this year, we saw Biden signing the security paper with Lapid on the exact day of the third hearing on consequences of overturning Roe v. Wade. Okay, and so you talk about river of information with, so we had rivers of information coming from the January 6 hearings, but we had rivers of information coming out of these Roe v. Wade hearings. Okay, and just, it was, just scary what we heard the pro-abortionists saying during these hearings. Okay, So very fascinating that that was on the same day. Okay. And then we see a connection with Ezekiel 23 to that term couch that we saw over in the book of Esther. Okay. And then it says, so when they had slaughtered their children for their idols, they entered my sanctuary on the same day to profane it. And lo, thus they did within my house. Furthermore, they even sent for men who came from afar. And I'll let you read the rest of that part because that part's not totally clear to me. Well, it talks about you sat on a splendid couch with the table arranged before it, on which you had set my incense and my oil. So I think there's kind of like a harlot picture here, and just how they're like selling the land. Um, 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 Before these men who came from afar. Okay, so that's a picture of Biden with the leader of the 9 Arab countries. And then it goes on to say, because of all this behavior, okay, but they went into her as they would go into a harlot. Okay, wait. Then I said concerning her who was worn out by adulteries, will they now commit adultery with her when she is thus? Okay, very similar to what we read in Esther. Okay, but they went into her as they would go into a harlot. Thus they went into Olawa and Oholibah, the lewd women. But they, righteous men, will judge him with the judgment of adulteresses, and with the judgment of women who shed blood, because they are adulteresses and blood is on their hands. For thus says the Lord, bring up a company against them, and give them over to terror and plunder. The company will stone them with stones, and cut them down with their swords. They will slay their sons and their daughters, and burn their houses with fire. Okay, so if that's the judgment for this behavior, very interesting. Pay attention if you're wondering what's coming up. Okay. So what I'm wondering is if 3 more days actually connects to 3 weeks. Okay. So in Genesis 40, we read, Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift your head up from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay. So 3 days would be July 14th, 15th, and 16th. Even though Biden was really in Israel for 4 days. It just, maybe it works out to just be like 3 days. And then, but we saw that Jonah was in Nineveh for a 3 days walk. Okay. And then it says 3 more days, and that could be a picture of 3 more weeks. Okay. And I'll show you some other verses as to why I think that. Okay. And then it says within 3 more weeks, Pharaoh will lift your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay. And so we see in Esther 2 that Esther said, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Okay, so what's interesting is there's a couple different ways that I could interpret this. I think there's a couple different fulfillments, really. Is one, first we had Israel had 3 weeks of a fallen government, and then so 3 weeks plus 3 days of a fallen government until Biden showed up and signed this document. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. And then so that could be the Jews fasting for 3 days, night or day. And then it says, my maidens will also fast in the same way. So then we could have 3 days and 3 weeks of, just America being in shambles. After the Biden signed this peace agreement. Okay. But then, what's it, okay, so then there was another way of looking at this is also too, is, okay, so we had Biden like signed the document on the 14th, so we had the 3 days, 14th, 15th, 16th, and then what we saw is that the Jewish people started on the 17th, started 3 weeks of fasting. Okay, it's on their calendar because on the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Ab, they fast for 3 weeks to, kind of fast for the fallen temple, and the fact that they're in exile and things like that. So that also could connect to Jews fasting 3 days, night or day. Okay. And then America, like God's people in America, probably are during the same time frame, are probably just really, have a type of fasting because of just all the bad stuff happening in America right now. Okay. So there's that too. Okay. And then, okay, it says the water prevailed 15 cubits higher and the mountains were covered. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So it's kind of interesting. Oh, so I never thought about this. So maybe the water prevailing 15 cubits is a picture of the 3 days, and the water prevailing 150 days is the picture of the 3 weeks. Okay. I'm not totally sure, but that's a possibility. Where like maybe each of the week is worth 50 days. So, maybe that's the deal, because like with Trump, we had almost like a year of judgment from God, things happening. And so maybe like kind of what maybe God's saying, it's like, okay, I'm almost squeezing in like 50 days of judgment in a week here. So each of the 3 weeks after Biden, there's like, 50 days worth of judgment per week. So that's a possibility. Okay, so then also too, I might have already said this, but we saw with the fall of Israel's government, then on the 24th day, Biden signed the agreement with Lapid, but then you could have like a second 24 days where you go from July 14th to August 6th. Okay. And that also comes from the book of Daniel, where Daniel was mourning for 3 full weeks. Oh, that's actually what I'm saying right here. I didn't say this was from the book of Daniel. Daniel was mourning for 3 full weeks. Then he had a messianic quote unquote encounter on the 24th. Okay. You saw an angel. Okay. So that could be a picture of, the fact that the government fell and then Biden came like a messianic figure to sign this agreement. Okay. So definitely interesting. So 3 baskets on America's head. So baskets of bread, there's 3 baskets. So does that connect to 3 times dividing the land? Okay. So, so I said like the flood up to 15 cubits could connect to 3 times dividing the land. Okay, I'm gonna skip what I wrote here. So, because what we had in America is we had Obama with his Iran deal. Okay, we had Trump with his quote unquote deal of the century. Now we've had Biden with his security agreements. Okay, so if the baskets connect to these agreements, and we're on the 3rd basket, okay, in prophetical history, and what happens in the 3rd basket? We see the birds eating the bread. Okay, so so maybe God didn't bring as much judgment with the first 2 baskets, but now we're in the 3rd basket. Okay, so definitely something to think about. Okay, so um, here's another verse where it talks about on the very same day. Um, we see in Genesis, on the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife and the three wives of his sons entered the ark. Okay. Um, and so it's interesting because that's you got Genesis 7:14, which connects to July 14th. Okay. Um, and um, and so it's interesting too because we see in the story of Noah that the animals go into the ark two by two. Okay. And so um, we could have the two groups um, of people, the two groups of animals, the militant on the right and the militant on the left, and they went into the ark. They both have their quote unquote peace deals or documents trying to divide the land. Okay, so they're both under judgment. Okay. Um, and then so what I'm wondering is, did our judgment start 7th month, 17th day? Was that the start of the 3 weeks? Okay, because we read in Genesis 7:11, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. So this first time, where it's the 17th day of the 2nd month, does this connect to, during the time of after um, Trump signed the deal of the century in January, on March 17th was when, which is, like 7 weeks, it's almost 7 weeks later, was when we have 50 states with COVID on March 17th, 2020. Okay, so then in Genesis 8:4, we also read about a 17th day, but it's the 7th month on the 17th day. It says, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Okay. So it is that connecting to July 17th, the start of the 3 weeks after Biden was in Israel. Okay. And, so I'm wondering too, because I think it connects to the woman being nurtured in the wilderness for times, and half a time. Okay. The idea of the ark resting on the mountains. Okay. And then what's interesting too is that judgment of Babylon is listed in Revelation 17 and 18. And so what's interesting about July 17th is that it's also Tammuz 18. And that is the fast day for Tammuz 17 because it's postponed for a day because Tammuz 17 is on a Sabbath. Okay, so kind of this 17-18 is connected to July 17th. Okay, so very interesting. Okay, and what's interesting about Tammuz 17, so Tammuz 17 is a fast day of the Jewish people, okay? But they don't fast on the Sabbath, so they fasted on July 17th this year, okay? And so what they were fasting about for Tammuz 17 is that's the day that Moses broke the tablets, okay? It was the second breaching of Jerusalem's walls. The sacrifices were discontinued. An idol was put in the temple. The Torah was burned on that day. Okay. Like probably in different years. Not all at the same time. But it's interesting because in Israel's history, a lot of events end up happening on like certain key days on the calendar. Okay, so Tammuz 17 is one of those. And I thought it was interesting that we have this picture of Moses breaking the tablets because that could connect to this idea of Biden breaking both America and Israel. Okay, it's like he made a mess of America. He's going to try to go over to Israel, but what does he want to do to Israel? He wants to divide the land. So, and then it's interesting this idea of second breaching of Jerusalem's walls because, this is the second document with this two-state solution type idea. um, what's interesting too, on July 16th, is we read Psalm 83. The Jewish people read Psalm 83. Um, and so it says, "For behold, your enemies made an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, 'Come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they have made a covenant, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them.'" Okay, so there's 9 countries listed there. And then I think Assyria makes the 10th. Okay, they have become a help to the children of Lot. Okay, so this could definitely connect to. So what we see is, these 9, 10 nations coming together and conspiring together. So we definitely see that with the GCC, that these nations are working together. And then, and they all want a 2-state solution in America. Like they won't rest until there's, in their mind, justice for the Palestinians. Okay, quote unquote. Okay. I thought it was interesting. It says they have become a help to the children of Lot, because if you know the story of Lot, he goes out with Abraham and he kind of picks the better part of the land, the good parts of the land. Okay. So he kind of goes one direction and Abraham goes the other direction. Okay. So definitely could be a picture of the Palestinians. Okay. Even though we do see kind of a listing of Philistia. Okay. In those verses. But, if you understand that a lot of these nations, Arab nations, are, all trying to figure out, how to help the Palestinians. It's very interesting. So I talked about this in my last video. Let's see. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. So we already saw that on January 6th, but I think we're going to see a second one. Let's see, because these are days of vengeance. Okay, and they will fall by the edge of the sword. Okay, for there be great distress on the land and wrath to this people. Okay, God's wrath. Okay, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentile until the times of the Gentile are fulfilled. Okay, so what we're seeing is that God's going to allow America and Israel to be trampled until, he says done. Okay, no more trampling of my courts. Okay. And that's going to be the end of the time of the Gentiles. Okay. And and he's allowing the fullness of sin, of the Gentiles to happen. But then at some point he's going to say, I'm done. Okay. And then it says there be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth dismay among nations, and perplexity at the roaring of the seas and the waves. Okay. So we see that, like, the Perseids, meteors started on July 14th. There was an earthquake in Israel on July 13th. There was a windstorm. I'm not sure where, like Montana or something like that. Sharks. Oh no, windstorm. Because then I wrote dust storm in Montana. I don't know if the windstorm is something different or I just accidentally put that in there twice. We read about shark attacks. There's flooding in Colorado and flooding in Kentucky. And, basically right now there's fires happening in the West. There's been flooding in the middle of the country. Heat waves. Just a lot going on all at once, okay? Men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Now, sometimes I wonder when it talks about the Son of Man coming in a cloud. Sometimes I wonder if the cloud is a picture of the deluding influence. Okay. And sometimes the Son of Man could connect to, like people that are pretending to be like a messianic type figure. Okay. So maybe that's Trump coming in a cloud with this deluding influence. Okay. And starting this civil war. So key dates. Okay. The deal of the century was January 28th. So 7 weeks after the deal of the century was when we had the 50th state with COVID. So 6 weeks, I thought that was interesting. 6 weeks after the deal of the century was when the pandemic was declared the pandemic on 3/11. We got that number 6 there. Okay. You think God's trying to say something to us? And then, so 50th day after the deal of the century was when the shutdown started. Okay. And then I wrote 120 days after the deal of the century was the start of rioting in America. And actually, it's actually day 119. Okay. Which connects to 9/11. Okay. Because that was a type of 9/11. Okay. Like, well, if you think of 9/11 being a picture of like civil war and stuff like that. Okay. So then here's all the different quote unquote peace deals. On the 70th week after the quote unquote deal of the century, that was when Netanyahu was out. He lost his power. That same week was when Trump was kicked off of Facebook and Instagram. So in the story of the Tower of Babel, where it says, "Let us go down and confuse their language." Okay, so Biden's people went down and kicked Trump off of Facebook and Instagram. So they couldn't make all these plans like they did for January 6th. Although I think they just went and found another platform. So what I'm wondering, okay, so like I said, I'm wondering if there's faster judgment for Biden. There, is it 3.5 weeks instead of the 7 weeks that it took for, the COVID shutdown? And then, like I said, the George Floyd riots were actually on 119 days, which is a picture of 9/11. So the reason why I was wondering, so in Genesis 4, we read about Lamech said to his wives, "For I have killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77fold." So kind of that concept of multiplication. Okay. So if Trump is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77fold. That double the, well, you can't really say double the amount, but like how I don't know how to say that, like 7 folds and then 77, like 1 7 or 2 sevens, okay? And so Lamech could be a picture of Biden. I killed a man for wounding me, Israel, and a boy for striking me. That could be Trump. Okay. What's interesting too is that Trump got COVID at the beginning of Sukkot on the Hebrew calendar, October 1st, which was week 35 to 36. You see that 6x6 number there, week 36. And then what was interesting is that Biden got COVID on the 7th day of Sukkot on the Gregorian calendar. If you take and make July the 7th month, Sukkot would have been July 15th through July 21st. Okay, so Biden got COVID on the 7th day. Okay, so remember at the beginning we talked about Vashti did not show up on the 7th day. So I'm wondering if we're like in the 7th day. Okay. So the Jewish people, they consider the 21st of the 7th month to be the final day of divine judgment. So it was interesting that Biden got COVID on that day, so has God decided that, Biden is now under judgment? Um, and it was interesting that July 21st was also the same day as the 8th hearing. So, was God deciding too that Trump is also under judgment? Okay. I mean, they're definitely deciding that in the January 6th hearings, okay, based on what the 8th hearing was when they were talking about the 187 minutes, I believe. So, and then, so we saw another 9/11 date on November 7th. Okay, so that was interesting because that was when Biden was declared the winner. Okay. Let's see. And then I talked in my other videos about how Biden was, declared the winner on the 62nd day, and it would have been the 61st day if they didn't do January 6th, if they didn't do the riot. Okay, so very interesting. Okay, 120 days after the peace signings on September 15th was Trump's second impeachment vote. Okay, that happened on January 13th and 21. Okay, so very interesting. Okay, and then we had 8/13/2020 to 2/8/2021 was 180 days. So 8/13 was, the first the first Abrahamic Accord. Okay, and then and then it lasted. Okay, so it was 180 days until the last Abrahamic Greek. So that's a picture of the 180 days banquet of Esther. Okay, and then and then we saw Trump's impeachment trial. So the reason why I'm kind of a little distracted here, because I was wondering if, see, it's interesting to me that this, okay, see right here, August 13th, 2020 was the peace deal with UAE. Okay, so I was trying to figure out, because we see this concept of 2 full years in scripture. Okay, and so I was kind of, what I'd really love to know is, and I could look that up really quick, is what was the Hebrew date of August 13th in 2020. So that was, okay, so August 13th was Av 23 on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, but what's kind of interesting is, so yeah, I mean, we are kind of approaching 2 full years after the start of Trump's Abrahamic Accords, so definitely very interesting. And then, so what was interesting too is on the 119th week after the deal of the century, that was May 14th, 2022. That's when we saw abortion protest on that day in DC. So another 9/11 or Civil War type picture. Okay. And then, on the 123rd week, Aaron dies at age 123. So that was like the start of the January 6th hearings. Okay. The 125th week, which was 70 plus 55, was the collapse of the Israeli government. There must be a connection with that 55 number that I don't totally understand, but I know one of the kings was only given 55 years to reign, and so Bennett was only given 55 weeks to be prime minister before the government collapsed. So then, the other thing that's interesting about July 14, 2022 is that besides it being 50 months after Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, so we see that 50 number again, it was also 22 months after 9/15/2020, okay, which was when he had the Abrahamic signings. Okay, so 22, that's interesting because there's a connection to year 2022. Okay, but 22 is also a connection to the 8th day. Okay, because the festivals go from the 15th to the 21st, and then the 8th day is always the 22nd. Okay. What I thought was interesting is that 9/15/2020 was when, when they were doing the Abrahamic signings in Washington, D.C. That was the 1335th day of Trump. Okay, and then if you take the number of days since 9/15, you have 668 days, which is half the time frame of 1335. And so I think that's very interesting, that we have Trump has his 1335 day, and then we have Biden with this 668 day. Like Biden's moving faster kind of thing. Okay. And then let's see, what was interesting too was that on July 17th was day 622 of Biden's term. So it's interesting that, I told you that I thought maybe on July 17th was when God decided that now there's judgment against Biden in America for him signing that document to divide the land. And it was interesting that that's day 622, because we see the 22, well, we see that number 6, which connects to Trump, and then we see 22, which connects to connects to the year 2022, but it also connects to the 8th day. So is that God's way of saying, okay, one way I'm going to bring judgment against Biden is I'm going to bring the 6th king back as the 8th king. Okay, so definitely very interesting. And then let's see. So July 15th to the 21st would be a type of Sukkot on the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so remember that God's going to protect us in our booths. Okay. July 20. Okay, let's see. I already talked about July 21st, July 24th. I'm wondering. Okay, so like after after Trump signed the deal of the century, we saw this, okay, so on a certain date, okay, I gotta go back to that calendar here. Okay, so we saw that, on the 119th days after the deal of the century was when the rioting started in America. So that was like a type of the lion's den. Okay, those are the George Floyd riots on May 26 in 2020. And then 190 days after the deal of the century, or you could also consider it the 71st day of rioting, was the explosion in Lebanon on 8/4, and I wondered if that was a type of fiery furnace. So what I'm seeing now this year is that we saw on July 24th was what you can consider a type of fiery furnace with the oak fire near Yosemite growing. Okay, and then so we've seen that ever since then, the fires in California have just been, in the West, have just been going crazy. Okay, so definitely kind of a repeat of history too, that the judgment, like I said, we're having the same kind of judgment that we had under Trump, but it's concentrated. And so we're seeing, that same type of fiery furnace phase, and then so maybe it's kind of a little backwards with Biden, that we do the fiery furnace phase first, and then we won't enter the lion's den type phase until the Civil War starts in America. So that's what I was wondering. So yeah, so definitely very interesting. Okay, So what was interesting on July 29th is, okay, so that's the start. The Jewish people mourn for 3 weeks, but then they enter this phase of 9 days of like concentrated, even more um, concentrated mourning. Okay, and that started on July 29th, was the start of the 9 days. Okay, because it goes from then until the 9th of Av. Okay. And what was interesting about, so it's interesting that that happened on July 29th, because 29 adds up to 11. It was the start of the first day of the month of Av, which Av is the 11th month. Okay, so definitely very interesting. What was interesting is that we saw on that day that Trump was he had a protest from 9/11 families because he was playing golf with Saudi Arabia. There's, a whole deal with, because they believe that 9/11, that, Saudi Arabia is connected to 9/11. Okay, and here Trump is, being all friends with them and stuff like that. And, see, because Trump looks at the world in terms of economy, okay, and money and stuff like that. Okay, and Saudi Arabia is paying for this golf tournament or whatever it is. So I think that's very interesting, and I think that that could be, kind of like a 9-day warning about another 9/11 event type happening. It was interesting too that we saw Will Smith apologize to Chris Rock on that day, because I talked about how that's a picture of like Moses hitting the rock, okay, which would be a picture of like, Trump and Biden trying to divide the land of Israel. Okay, so that was interesting. Okay, on July 30th was when we had the Al Qaeda leader was killed by a drone. Okay, and they said he was a key planner of the 9/11 attacks. So we see a second 9/11 picture on the 30th. So I'm wondering if those are like kind of a weak picture of, maybe what's going to happen on August 5th and August 6th. Kind of a showing us that a 9/11 type event is going to happen on August 5th and August 6th. Okay. So then this key date, August 6th, is the 9th of Av. Okay, Av is the 11th month. 11 connects to judgment. Okay, on the 9th of Av, so in the history of the Jewish people, or the nation of Israel, so 2 temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av in 2 different, like time frames. The first temple and the second temple was destroyed on that day. So then you gotta kind of wonder what's going to happen. The Jews were kicked out of England. They were kicked out of Spain. What I thought was interesting is that America bombed Hiroshima on that day, and I always kind of wondered if there was going to be some judgment for, America using nuclear weapons. So when we think about 2 temples being destroyed, if you think about America being a temple of God and Israel being a temple of God, so then it's just very interesting to think about this particular date in history being connected to 2 temples being destroyed. Okay, because is civil war going to start in both these nations on that day? That's kind of the big question in my mind. Okay, what's interesting is on August 6th, the Jewish people read Isaiah 1 to 27. So you got to go read those verses because they're highly prophetical. Okay, and what's interesting is that verse 12 talks about, God said, "Who requires this of you, the trampling on my courts?" Okay, because that's what I think these, we got the followers of Trump and the followers of Netanyahu. I think, they have kind of this, this, I mean, for, the followers of Netanyahu, they have kind of this messianic uh, delusion, thinking that they're going to bring in the messianic era with Netanyahu, and then you have the Christian nationalists that follow Trump, thinking that they're going to bring, this Christian nation with Trump as the leader. And how they're going to do it is they're going to trample God's courts. Okay, so it's just kind of this whole backwards, upside down belief system. Okay, and is that what God wants these people to do? I don't think so. So read that in Isaiah. He's not happy that these people are trampling his courts. Okay, so interesting that they're reading that on the 9th of August 6th. Okay, what's interesting too is that the Jewish people consider, so they have the Shabbat of vision happens the day before the 9th of Av. And so that actually happens on August 6th because of the 9th of Av being postponed for a day, like to August 7th, because of Sabbath. The Shabbat of vision ends up falling on the 9th of Av. Okay, so what's really interesting about this Shabbat of vision is that the Jewish people believe that they're given a vision of the third temple on the Shabbat of vision. Okay, well, if Jesus comes back, then you are definitely going to okay, they says we are granted a vision of the third temple on the Shabbat of vision. Okay, so so it's just fascinating. Okay, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, and then I wrote down this verse that I was trying to say in my last, or this quote from the Jewish people. They say, those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Moshiach. Okay, with the Messiah. Okay, that's what the Jewish people believe. Okay, and I think it's really true because, that I believe that God's people are the ones that are sad when they see the destruction of America and they see the destruction of Israel. Okay, because it's interesting that you have Iran wants to destroy both America and Israel. So definitely very interesting. The other thing that's very interesting too is that on the Hebrew calendar, we're in the year 5782, and that adds up to 22. Okay, so that's very interesting too. Okay, another very fascinating thing. This is why, to me, August 6th is a high watch date. Okay, because if you know about Christmas in July, kind of the history of Christmas July, there's some people that consider July 25th to be the Christmas in July. Okay, well, so then if that's true, if July 25th is a type of December 25th, then that would make August 6th a type of January 6th. Okay, is that not fascinating? Okay, and what's interesting is so January 6th is like Three Kings Day, and then January 7th is the Orthodox Christmas. Okay, so I think that's very interesting. Okay, I think January 6th too is also a type of Christmas. I think it's the Armenian. Okay, I'm getting my calendar out here that says this. Okay, so January 6th is considered Little Christmas, Armenian Christmas, Three Kings Day, and Epiphany. Okay, January 7th is considered Orthodox Christmas. Okay, so definitely fascinating. Okay, what's interesting about the Three Kings story, Three Kings Day, is we read about the city of Jerusalem being divided into thirds. Okay, so I think we have three kings carrying gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so is it the people that are bringing the gift of gold are the ones that are bringing the valuable gift to God? And so that would be a picture of the people bringing, those would be, the people. Okay, gold would be connected to the Messiah. Okay, and then myrrh and frankincense and myrrh, could be connected to like Trump and Biden, who, maybe they have a different type of smell, or one of them is like a myrrh, I think, is like a funeral spice, so not a great gift. Okay, so okay. Another thought too. Oh, I was done with that, right? Yes. Okay, so then other thoughts, Gog and Magog. A lot of people talk about that. It talks about Gog coming down from the north. Okay, so I think we could see two fulfillments. One is, I think we've already seen a fulfillment with Russia. Is the northern country doing a type of civil war with Ukraine? Okay, and then, because they're like brothers, what's interesting with the Civil War in America is we had North versus South, okay? And then, so that connects to the Civil War in Israel was North versus South. They became the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom. And so then God coming down from the North could be a picture of, the dividing of America. And so I think Biden is the Southern Kingdom, and so God coming down from the north could be Trump coming down to start war with the Southern Kingdom. Okay, the Civil War. Okay, and then what's interesting too is that Iran is also in the north. Okay, and so then, so I don't know, because like I don't know if civil war starts in Israel too. Like I'm leaning strongly that it's going to be a civil war in America too. I mean, in Israel. What did I say? There's going to be a civil war in Israel too, besides the civil war in America. Because for the longest time I thought maybe Iran was gonna, you know, because of the fiery furnace, I thought Iran was going to, you know, bomb Israel. But then I'm wondering too, because we saw on August 4th, 2020, we saw that there was an explosion in Lebanon, and and so that was very interesting because they believed that it was these terrorists in Lebanon, like Hezbollah, that they were trying to make their bombs like even more powerful, and then ended up causing this explosion. Okay, because they want to bomb Israel. Okay, and so so if there's this concept that people are end up being killed on the own gallows that they made, so does that mean we're going to see a type of explosion in Iran with their nuclear stuff? Okay, and so that could be maybe how God brings judgment on Iran. So I'm not totally sure. We'll see what happens. I mean, the reason why I thought maybe Iran was going to bomb Israel is because there's that picture of Jesus comes and resurrects Lazarus, and so I was wondering if Lazarus was a picture of the Jewish people. And so we'll see what happens. So and this is another, where I'm just kind of wondering, you got the fiery furnace and you got the lion's den, Daniel 3, Daniel 6. There was 3 friends of Daniel went into the fiery furnace. It was just Daniel that went in the lion's den. The furnace was heated 7 times. There was 30 days of worshiping the statue before the lion's den, before Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. So like I said, civil war in both countries, Israel and America. But then I'm wondering too, because like I said, we saw a type of fiery furnace on during Trump's time on August 4th, and then now on July 24th, we kind of entered into a fiery furnace type phase. And so then the next step of judgment for Biden would be the lion's den with the rioters. Okay. And then because I called with Iran, I called them the Rit Rats to help me remember them. Okay, so because you got Russia and you got Iran and you got Turkey, and they're, just recently, just recently they all came together, so they're all like close friends and everything like that, which is kind of scary. So we read in Genesis 19. Okay, so it says, Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Okay. So we get this concept of the smoke ascending like the smoke of a furnace. But that doesn't necessarily have to be caused by bombs. It could be just a picture of, civil war with people just burning their own country. So we'll see what happens. Okay. So comparing Trump and Biden, okay, we got Trump with this deal of the century. We got Biden with the security agreement. Trump with the 5 Abrahamic Accords. Biden with this, meeting with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, the GCC. What was interesting for Trump's judgment, COVID was declared a pandemic in 6 weeks. For Biden, monkeypox was declared a global health emergency. And I don't know how many days that was. Can I find it quickly on my calendar? No, not finding it quick enough. So that happened for Biden's judgment. Okay, so we saw the COVID shutdown on the 7th week after the deal of the century. Biden got COVID 7 days later. Trump had COVID on Sukkot Day 1. Biden had COVID on Sukkot Day 7. Like I said, fiery furnace on 8/4 under Trump. A fiery type furnace on 7/24 under Biden. Riots started on day 119 after the deal of the century. Our riots going to begin on 11/9 or the 9th of Av, which is August 6th, is a big question mark. COVID shutdown happened under Trump. We're fasting for 3 weeks under Biden. There was hurricane, flooding, fires under, with Trump. Like, I had a chart in one of my videos with after all the different Abrahamic Accords, I listed all the hurricanes that happened, all the different weather events that happened after each of them. And then, but we're seeing under Biden the heat wave, the fire, the floods, economic down. I'm sure there was an economic downturn with the shutdown under Trump, and we're seeing a recession on July 28th with Biden, even though they're trying to call it something else. In 2021, we saw the second impeachment of Trump. In 2022, this is kind of weird because it's not like judgment on Biden, but we're seeing we saw the 8th January 6th hearing. What was interesting is that they voted on the 120th day after 9/15 about Trump's impeachment, whether they were going to impeach him or not. And then what's interesting is we saw with Biden getting COVID that his judgment, like his personal judgment, started on the 21st, so kind of interesting, the connection with those two numbers, 120 and 21. So I talked about the day 1335 connected to Trump and the day 668 connected to Biden. Trump was replaced by Biden. Biden's going to be replaced by Messiah, or maybe Trump for 3 days. I don't know. And then Messiah. I mean, since I think Trump and Messiah are coming at the same time, it's a little hard to know. Anyways, we'll talk about that after it happens. So I listed. I thought it was kind of interesting because I have a list here of kind of like the Trump quote unquote suffering of Trump and the quote unquote suffering of Biden. Because, so you have Trump complaining about fake news all the time. And, he's talking about the January 6th hearings as part of his suffering and his 2 impeachments and his Russian investigation because woe is me, poor little Trump, get out your violin. He talks about how he's the most persecuted person probably ever in history. I can't remember exactly how he worded that. But then we see kind of the same stuff with Biden because every time every time there's some like they're all constantly the media is constantly bringing up about whenever Biden's going somewhere, some funeral, they talk about, oh, he could relate because his son died. um and then it was interesting because they talked about Biden, I guess when he was talking to the Palestinians, was talking about how he was Irish and he could relate to the Palestinians because he was oppressed by a colonial power, the British, just like the Palestinians are quote unquote oppressed by the Jewish people, a colonial power, blah blah blah. Okay, just a bunch of lies and hogwash and blah blah blah. So it's interesting because basically we have these two people kind of like acting like they're suffering servants. Okay, because remember, who is the true suffering service? The servant, the Messiah. Okay, and so in Revelation 12 we read about the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for time, and half the time from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so to understand the 2 wings of the great eagle, you got to go to Daniel 7:4, where it says the first, okay, so it's talking about 4 beasts, and it says the first was like a lion and had the wings of the eagle. Okay, and so I believe that's a picture of Jesus. Okay, Jesus is the Lion of Judah. And so Daniel says, I think it's Daniel that says, because I think he's the one who has this dream. He says, I kept looking until its wings were plucked and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. So instead of the Lion of Judah, being Jesus, instead of Jesus being the Lion of Judah, the wings of, Jesus's wings were plucked. You have Biden and Trump like stealing, Jesus's wings in a sense, acting like messianic figures. And then, this lion was lifted from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man with the human mind. So instead of being the Lion of Judah, it's a man on 2 feet. Okay. And so that's interesting when you connect it to the statue of Daniel. I believe we're down to the 2 feet part of the statue. Okay, and we'll look at that on another slide. So we are currently in a day with 2 messianic type figures, and what we have is the woman is, she is in the wilderness being nourished for time, and half this time, okay, from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so what we have is, that God's going to take care of us, especially during the dividing of time. So we are currently in a day with 2 messianic type figures, 2 men instead of the Lion of Judah standing on 2 feet, connects to Daniel's statue where the feet are the end of the prophecy. Okay. And then 2, you could read about this in Ezekiel where it talks about the two eagles. Okay. And so there's a great eagle with great wings. Okay. And so what does it say? Long pinions and a full plumage of many colors came to Lebanon and took away the top of the cedar. He plucked off the topmost of its young twigs and brought it to a land of merchants, and he set it in a city of traders. Okay, so whenever you read about merchants and traders, you want to think about Trump. Okay, but then there was another great eagle. Okay, and then the question about the second great eagle is, will it thrive? Will he not pull up its roots and cut off its fruit so that it withers? Okay, behold, though it is planted, will it thrive? Will it not completely wither as soon as the east wind strikes it? Wither on the beds where it grew? Okay, so very interesting. Okay, so here's Daniel's statue. Okay, so I have Netanyahu as the head of gold. Sometimes I wonder if Jesus is the head of gold, but then I don't understand when the gold gets kind of crushed, so I'm not sure about that, because the stone that's cut out of the mountain that crushes the statue is definitely Jesus. And so I'm not totally clear. I mean, the head of gold could just connect to Israel, okay, and whoever the current leader is, okay. I mean, in the chapter it's talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nebuchadnezzar ends up like being exiled for 7 time frames. You know, so that could be Trump, that could be Netanyahu. And then I got the 2 legs of iron as Trump and the BLM rioters. Okay, but the 1 leg of iron could be Netanyahu, which would like connect to the 2 witnesses. Okay. And so then talking about the feet of the statue, because that's where I think we are. So let's talk, so I believe like the belly and its thighs of bronze connect to Obama and Biden. Okay, Obama's the belly of the beast. Okay, the legs of iron, and then now we're at the feet. Its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, but so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Okay, so for the longest time, I just didn't really know how it worked out. Until I heard someone talk about the clay being a wet clay. Okay, so what we have is iron mixed with wet clay. So really kind of in the feet, it's like you have you have 3 groups of people. Okay, so the iron would be connected to Trump's peeps. Okay, and so that connects to the 10 toes connect to the 10 horns. Okay, because you have the beast and the 10 horns, they hate the harlot. Okay, so the harlot could be a picture of, like Biden and the abortion rights people. Okay, the wetness could connect to Biden's peeps, because Biden is the beast from the sea. The clay can connect to the Messiah's peeps. Okay, because on Hanukkah we sing about how you're playing with a dreidel that is dried clay. It's I had a little dreidel, I made it out of clay. Dreidel. And so it's dry, now I'm playing with it. Okay, so there's no longer any sea in this dreidel. Okay, isn't that interesting? Okay, so that's where I think we're at now, at the 2 feet. Okay, Oh, and so it's interesting with the 2 feet too. You have the same picture of like the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, or the Civil War type concept. Okay, you know, and but also you have that same concept where these materials aren't mixing. Okay, we have a divided kingdom, and that's what's happening in America right now. Is that we don't Trump's people aren't mixing with Biden's people and Messiah's people. Okay, they're um, like in the book of Esther, Vashti is doing her own banquet in the same palace. Okay, doing her own thing. Okay, um, so that's what's going on. Um, and I have to confess, I'm a little bit American e- egocentric. Like I have kind of not. I kind of lost track of what's going on in Israel because there's just so much going on in America that I don't have as much information about America, Israel, and kind of how it fits in to Bible prophecy, except that I'm aware that there's a lot of repeats um, with, you have the Netanyahu followers are very similar to Trump followers, where they didn't really accept the leadership of Bennett, and I'm sure now they're not accepting the leadership of Lapid. Okay. Um, so just a lot of similar things going on there. And then, so the sign of Jonah is where we see, okay, the scribes and the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." But he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Okay, so I was wondering while I'm reading this if the sign of Jonah, so an evil and adulterous generation, they crave for a sign. So they're not looking at Jesus and they're not waiting for Jesus to come back. They want a sign. Okay, and so you could have Jonah the prophet, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, could be a picture of Biden with his 3 days in Israel and 3 weeks of judgment, and then just like, and so he's got, one of the wings of the eagle, and then the Son of Man could be a picture of Trump being in the heart of the earth with the other, um, um, because then you could say the 3 days and the 3 nights connect to the six quote unquote peace deals of Trump there. Um, because there's a connection with Jonah is connected to the Jews fasting for 3 days, night or day. And then the Son of Man connects to Esther and her maidens fasting in the same way. So the Jews could be a picture of Biden and his followers, and Esther and the maidens could be a picture of Trump and his followers. Okay. So 3 days could be July 14, 15, 16. 3 nights could be 3 weeks under judgment. Okay. So then you have 1335, I think, connects to time times and half a time, which we know time times and half a time definitely connects to 3.5 weeks. But it could also connect to 1335, where one is 1 year under judgment for the deal of the century. Then you have 3 days of Biden in Israel, 3 weeks of judgment for Biden after signing a security agreement with Lapid. And then 5 is the dividing of time. Okay, because it could be half a time. Dividing of time connects to civil war in America and or civil war in Israel too. Um, Probably not or. I mean, I definitely am convinced about civil war in America, maybe civil war in Israel. Okay. And then I figured this out too in Daniel 9:27. It says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So that's from the New International Version. I usually use NASV, but I thought this kind of said it a little differently. because it says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. So that would connect to like the first, 7 weeks until judgment was brought on the quote unquote deal of the century. And then maybe you can say in the middle of the second 7, so what you have is 3.5 weeks. That would be 3.5 weeks. He puts a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, because if you consider like us having the coronavirus as a type of sacrifice, the God in the middle of the, second set of 7 weeks, God puts an end to the coronavirus for his people. Okay. That finally will be set free from that judgment. Okay, under Messiah. And then just it connects to Joseph in jail with the cupbearer and the baker. So I thought it was interesting that it says Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Okay, so what if that's God being furious with Trump and Netanyahu? Trump and Biden. I think Trump is the cupbearer and Biden is the baker. Okay, and then Joseph says the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Okay, so is that a picture of Trump returning, and then he can put the cup of judgment into Biden's hand? Okay, and then Joseph said to the baker, the 3 baskets are 3 days within, which would be those 3, peace deals that I talked about, including the Iran deal. Within 3 more days, which would be 3 weeks, Pharaoh will lift your head from you, hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. So since, Biden is signing these deals that are allowing Israel's enemies to like eat the bread of Israel, eat the Jewish people, quote unquote, then God's gonna allow the birds to eat the flesh off of Biden. Okay. And then it says, thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Trump is not, he's gonna forget Jesus. Okay. And then it's interesting, the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, because I told you about how there's a connection with August 6th. Well, a connection with August 6th to January 6th, which is connected to Christmas, okay, or 3 Kings Day, or that kind of stuff. What's interesting, in the second visit to Joseph, the cup of judgment, the cup was put in a Benjamin sack, but you could look at the cup as being the cup of judgment, okay? And then we also read about how the spies returned with grapes and a bad report on August 5th, okay? So that could connect to Trump's followers, okay? That, they're not happy with the grapes. The grapes of wrath, could be a picture of Biden's people, okay? And so Trump's people end up squishing the grapes and turning them into, wine or whatever, into the cup. So that's the deal with that. And then, so I thought it was interesting that the fire in Trump Tower was on the 50th floor. So that, it's a 9/11 picture, but, it could connect to time and half the time, and then it's interesting that it happened on Nissan 22, because that connects to 2022. And then there was another picture that I am not finding right now. Saturday the 18th. I mean, there were 6 firefighters injured, which connects the Trump 6. Um, uh, and Back to the Future, it's very interesting. Okay, so we see the 9/11 picture with the Twins Pine Mall, and then we see the 1335. Marty's name is 5 characters, so there's that 1335 picture. Okay, connects to the Lone Pine Mall. Okay, so kind of this concept of the twin pines turning into the lone pine, uh, which you could see it both ways, where the twin pines falling could be a picture of Biden's people and Trump's people falling, and then all that's left behind is Jesus's pine. Okay, or with 1335, you could see that one of the pines is being torn down. So Trump's people are tearing down Biden's pine. Marty returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. The mall is now called the Lone Pine Mall. Marty returns to the mall right when Doc is being shot by the Libyans. Okay, so is that a picture of judgment on Biden? Okay, what's interesting about in the scene with the 116, it actually starts out with 115, changes to 116. Okay, 116 is 9/11 upside down, but we also have the numbers of 5 and 6 of 115 and 116. So does that connect to August 5th and August 6th? Okay, we don't know. We won't know for sure. Okay, until we see what happens. Okay. Love this picture. If you see the burning on the right and burning on the left, you are out of time, or you should be with Jesus, who is kind of sort of not connected to time, who is otherworldly, and then we have the sea of Trump on one side, the sea of Obama Biden on the other side. You want to be with dry land and with Messiah in the middle, where we need to stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Okay, which I thought was interesting. I didn't even notice that until this time making this video, because I just always saw it as, this is the verse connected to the Red Sea. Moses says, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Well, I forgot that Jesus is the salvation of the Lord. And so I never thought about that. In a way, Moses is saying, stand by and wait to see Jesus come, basically, is what he's saying. So I thought that was interesting. So in Revelation 16, we read, the 7th angel, which could connect to Biden, poured out his bowl into the air, so he brought judgment. And out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, it is done. So is that God with the loud voice saying, okay, now judgment's going to come? Okay. Then there came flashes of lightning, rumbling, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since mankind has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. The great city was split into 3 parts. So is that America being split into 3 parts? Okay. And the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away and the mountains cannot be found. So definitely very interesting. So that's what I got for you today. So I really appreciate you tuning in. I know this is really long. It's a lot of information. There's so much information out there. But I wanted you to see that time could be really short. We really could be out of time, because I see so much of prophecy fulfilled, and especially because now we're under judgment for 2 or 3 different, documents, trying to divide Israel. So definitely look up for your redemption draws nigh. So I'm waiting to see what happens on, so on August 5th, we could see some bad report, that is the day. Okay, so uh, August 5th was when civil war started in Jerusalem in 67 CE. The spies it's also the same day that the spies returned with the grapes and a bad report. Okay, so I'm kind of looking to see if there's some kind of bad report coming out of Trump's people that spark the civil war. Okay, um, so August 5th and 6th are high watch dates. So but if you follow Jesus, you should be encouraged because Jesus is going to come and put us in his Sukkot booth of protection. Okay, there's that psalm that says, he's going to protect us during. I don't remember exactly how it, but there's a psalm that says he's going to protect us in his booth during the time of judgment. I might be mixing a couple different things that he says in the scripture, but definitely the concept of, it's the Passover picture. He's going to, while death and everything is happening out in Egypt, we're safe in our Passover booth with the blood of the lamb on the door. Okay, so hopefully you're a follower of Jesus, and so this would actually be really encouraging. um you know Jesus is going to come and separate us, and we're going to be protected. Okay, because when the Babylonians came to destroy the land of Israel, they left the poorest people of the land to to take care of the land. Okay, the poorest people of the land right now are God's people. Okay, so there is, so I mean, it's good news for God's people. So yes, I know times are rough and we're kind of mourning right now, but weeping will last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Amen on that. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. God bless.